praises transcendental songs is established as an irrevocable fact. Hare Krishna, good morning. How is everybody? Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 31st chapter, text 1 to 10. Focus first verse, but I was thinking we could go through the translations of verses 1 through 10, and then we'll come back to verse 1 and go a little more into it. Volunteers to start us off. Thank you. Sure.
Chapter 31. Lord Kapila's instructions on the movements of the living entities. Text 1. The personality of Godhead said, under the supervision of the Supreme Lord and according to the result of his work, the living entity, the soul, is made either into the womb of a woman, through the particle of male semen, and to assume a particular type of body.
On the first night, the sperm and ovum mix, and on the 5th night, the mixture ferments into a bubble. On the 10th night, it develops into a form like a plum, and after that, it gradually turns into a lump of flesh or an egg, as the case may be.
In the course of a month, a head is formed. At the end of 2 months, the hands, feet, and other limbs take shape. By the end of 3 months, the nails, fingers, toes, body, hairs, bones, and skin appear, as do the organ of generation and the other apertures in the body, namely the eyes, nostrils, ears, mouth, and anus.
Within 4 months from the date of conception, the 7 essential ingredients of the body, namely chow, blood, flesh, fat, bone, marrow, and semen comes in existence. At the end of the 5 months, hunger and thirst makes them so spell, and at the end of 6 months, the fetus enclosed by the amnion begins to move on the right side of Adam.
Deriving its nutrition from the food and drink taken by the mother, fetus grows and remains in the vomitable residence of stool and urine, which is the breeding place of all kinds of worms.
And again, all over the body by the hungry worms in the abdomen itself, the child suffers terrible agony because of his tenderness. He thus becomes unconscious moment after moment because of the terrible condition.
Owing to the mother's eating bitter, pungent foodstuffs or food which is too salty or too sour, the body of the child incessantly suffers pain which are almost intolerable.
Placed within the amnion and covered outside by the intestines, the child remains lying on the side of the abdomen, his head turned towards his belly and his back and neck arched like a bow.
The child thus remains just like a bird in a cage without freedom of movement. At that time, if the child is fortunate, he can remember all the troubles of his past 100 births, and he grieves wretchedly. What is the possibility of peace of mind in that condition?
Thus, endowed with the development of consciousness from the 7th month after his conception, the child is tossed downward by the airs that press the embryo during the weeks preceding delivery, like the worms born of the same filthy abdominal cavity. He cannot remain in one place.
A little bit intense, huh? Since we'll get into why that is. Let's go back to verse 1. So we'll read the Sanskrit word for word, etc. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Karmana Deva Netrena Karmana Deva Netrena Jantur Deho Papataye Janturdeho papataye Striya pravishta udaram Striya pravishta udaram Pumshoreta kanashaya Pumsoreta kanashaya Shri Bhagavan Vacha Karmana Deva Netrena Chaturdeho Papataye Striya Pravishta Uttam Soreta Kanashraya Chant.
Karma Dev Daiva Nityana Surdeo Patate Via Pravistya Ram Sarita Kanashraya Sri Bhagavan Vacha
Shri Bhagavan Vacha Karmana Deva Nitvena Janturdeho Papataye Pumsharita Kanashraya Shri Bhagavan Vacha Karmana Deva Nitvena Janturdeho Papataye Sriya Pravishta Pumsharita Kanashraya. Word for word. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Together. The Godhead said, Harmana results Deva Netrena under the supervision of the Lord. Jantu, the living entity. Deha, a body. Upapataye, for obtaining. Striya, of a woman. Pravishta, enters. Udaram, the womb. Pumsha, of a man. Reta, of semen. Kana, a particle. Ashreya, dwelling. Someone like to read the translation? Oh. The personality of Godhead said, under the supervision of the Supreme Lord, and according to the result of his work, the living entity, the soul, is made to enter into a woman through the particle of male semen to assume a particular type. Therefore, as stated in the last chapter, after suffering different kinds of hellish conditions, a man comes again to the human form of body. The same topic is continued in this chapter. In order to give a particular type of human form to a person who has already suffered hellish life, soul is transferred to the semen of a man who is just suitable to become his father. During sexual intercourse, the soul is traveled through the semen of the father into the womb's mother in order to produce a particular type body. This process is applicable to all embodied living entities, but it is especially mentioned for the man who is transferred to the Anda Tamishra hell. After suffering there, when he, who has had many types of hellish bodies, like those of dogs and hogs, is to come again to the human form, he is given the chance to take his birth in the same type of body from which he degraded himself to hell. Everything is done by the supervision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Material nature supplies the body, but it does so under the direction of the Supersoul. It is said in Bhagavad Gita that a living entity is wandering in this material world on a chariot made by material nature. The Supreme Lord, as Supersoul, is always present with the individual soul. He directs the material nature to supply a particular type of body to the individual soul according to the result of his work, and the material nature supplies it. Here, one word, Reta Kanashraya, is very significant because it indicates that it is not the semen of the man that creates life with the womb of the woman. Rather, the living entity, the soul, is sheltered in a part of the semen and is thus pushed into the womb of a woman. Then the body develops. There is no possibility of creating a living entity without the presence of the soul, simply by sexual intercourse. The materialistic theory that there is no soul and that a child is born simply by material combination of the sperm and ovum is not very feasible. It is unacceptable. Om Jnana Timanasya Jnana Shalakaya Chakshur Tasma Shiva Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Swami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gopani Chakati Nirviseshi Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatari Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Panchakalpatarikasya Kripasindhuriyaccha Patitanam Bhavane Vishnu. So we're starting a new chapter. I thought, for my own sake, maybe because this chapter continues really where the last one left off. Anybody here recap me what happened in chapter 31 or 30? Go ahead.
They were describing some of the lower planetary conditions and also just the journey. I was thinking about it, the evolution of the soul.
Okay. And that's right. And yeah, the evolution of the soul from birth in the material world to exploitative nature, right? To where that leads them ultimately to dragged into hell and what that experience is like. But then what happens from there? It's not in hell for eternity, but due to the actions, due to one's karma, a second chance is always given. But does the living entity, how do they use that second chance? And so my first thought when reading this is why this intense, gruesome description, very vivid description of the child in the womb. Definitely motherhood is something sacred. Definitely bringing life into this world is something sacred. But at the same time, you see how much actually the child in the womb suffers. It's a very, very unpleasant, very, very horrific experience. So why these intense, gruesome descriptions? Why in the last chapter this description of a soul being dragged into hell? And there's more of this in the Bhagavatam to come. This is not just the end of it. And so I was thinking about this. How come so many details? And the one word that came to me was reality, or reality in the virtual reality. Because in one sense, you can say this is not real reality, but it's a reality that our soul in this present body is experiencing and has to experience. And if we only consider it the only reality, we end up in the cycle that Bhagavatam is talking about, from birth to, youth, to adulthood, to old age, to not utilizing our human form, to suffering the actions that we performed, going through a hellish process, coming back. And now coming back is like, yeah, I get another chance after hell, which sucked. But now I'm in the womb and it's actually really, really difficult. It's almost intolerable. And then we're going to hear a little bit about what happens to, there's a turning point where this soul now has a chance to say, Krishna, I can turn to you and I can make sure I never go through this process again. Because I can remember what it was like. And I'm not going to do it. But he does it anyways. Why? Right? So Vedic teachings, whether it's our bhakti teachings in Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, or it's broader Vedic teachings or Yoga Sutras, they speak about this reality of the virtual reality, the world that we live in. It's very much described, the modes, material natures there. There's, the different tendencies of the jiva. There's so many aspects that are described, the suffering of a living entity, and it goes into detail. But where different philosophical schools will differ in their understanding is, okay, so what do we do with this reality? And where is the higher reality? What is that actually, and how do we get there? And so bhakti gives a definition of this. It gives an understanding that's very, I can say, advanced. It gives you an ultimate destination and a very specific ultimate destination, Goloka Vrindavan, and how to get there very specifically, the process of bhakti yoga. What is it like when you get there? What kind of relationships can you have with God? It's very specific. So not only do bhakti texts like Bhagavatam give us the really intense, gruesome, horrific aspects of reality in the material world, but they give us a very positive outlook of, okay, this is what it's like, but how can you make that turning point of the spirit soul to not continue to go through the cycle again and again? How can you break the cycle? That's where bhakti comes in. And so the first question that we can ask is, well, what determines the type of body in the first place, right? So I'm just going to reflect on this verse, first of all. The living entity, in accordance with his karma, and his actions, and what he does, and the reactions to come according to his actions, and always within the Lord's supervision. It's always, the Lord is guiding according to the desires of the living entity. Gives an example of a chariot, and the chariot is guided by our desires, and the Lord, being like a charioteer, always there as a super soul, is saying, okay, I'll facilitate the material nature using my energies in order to facilitate this jiva's desires. So in that sense, the living entity enters the soul into the semen. Semen holds the jivas, and the semen of the father enters the womb of the mother. And through this process, that living entity assumes a particular type of body. That was the last sentence of the verse. And the question is, how do we know what kind of body he assumes? What dictates that someone may have a more perhaps materialistically a higher advantage than someone other, a certain body, a human body, animal body, bird body, fish body. So you have to go back to desire. And when you think of desire, you have to go back to the mind. It all starts at the level of the mind. My spiritual master often says, you are where your mind is. And it's so true on so many levels. You are where your mind is, even just on a consciousness place. You know, if you're worried about something, you're worried that you just lost your job, but you're on holiday in the Bahamas. You may not be enjoying the holiday in the Bahamas like you might think you are, because you are where your mind is. You're worried that, hey, I don't have a job or money to pay for this holiday when I get back. There's another nice quote I heard from Vaisheshika Prabhu, which is, where attention goes, energy flows. Have you heard this one? It's really nice. Where attention goes, energy flows. So start at the level of the mind. And the power of thoughts are so powerful because thoughts are they're like idea seeds, and a thought can lead to a word, and words can change lives. Words have so much power. The words that come out of your mouth have an effect on your own consciousness, and what to speak of the effect they have in others' consciousness. And therefore, when we think of the words that come out of our mouth and what propels us to say certain things and think certain things, we have to think of what goes in the ears. So you have to be careful what you consume, right? So what you put in flows out. And I was hearing a podcast from Wisdom of the Sages recently, and they're reading through Bhagavatam in I think the 7th canto, and they're talking about the different ashrams, and they're talking about the sannyasa ashram in the Bhagavatam at the end of 7th canto. And it says that sannyasi, or ideally just a Vaishnava in general, is well-wishing for everyone, but modern media or news outlets or culture doesn't always teach you to be well-wishing for everyone. Often it can teach you to become a hater, it can teach you to criticize, to judge, to take stances, to take sides. So what you put in your ears, is it something that's creating animosity in your heart, something that's creating judgment, something that's creating the opposite of well-wishing everybody? Or are you hearing from good sources and positive things that are creating a culture of well-wishing? So that's the power of the thoughts. And Krishna speaks about this in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Yam yam vapi sparam bhavam yajantya ante kalevaram. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, whatever state of being one remembers, that's the mind. When he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. And therefore, Prabhupada says in the purport, how do you get to a state where you can attain something higher? It's what you remember. Therefore, if you remember Krishna and you chant Hare Krishna regularly, often to a point where you don't want to stop chanting Hare Krishna, it's going to be impossible to not remember Krishna at the time of death. And then Krishna continues to Arjuna, he says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time, carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Srila Prabhupada says this instruction is very important to all men engaged in material activities, men and women. This is everybody in this world. The Lord does not say that one should give up his prescribed duties. One can continue them and at the same time think of Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. By chanting Krishna's names, one will be transferred to the supreme planet, Krishna Loka, without doubt. So Krishna here is saying that, okay, what you think about determines your next birth. Therefore, what should you think about? Think about me. At the same time, do your duty. Do what you have to do. But think about me this whole time, because that's going to get you, what got you here in the first place is what you were thinking and desiring. And that wasn't me, so you're in this position. So use the same process and get out of here. Just think about me. So this is the power of the mind. The mind can take you all over the universe. Your thoughts can literally take you all over the universe. That's the power of the mind. In previous yugas, yogis, demigods, they could travel at the speed of the mind. And that sounds like something out of a mythological movie. But if you think about it, if the mind is so powerful that it can dictate what birth you can take, it could dictate which planet you go to, depending on your desire. That's how strong desires are. How is it not possible that from the power of the mind, you can travel anywhere? Of course you can. The mind's that powerful. We see it. Birth and death is happening due to the mind. The birth that people get is due to the mind. So this is how powerful it is. And I'll go one step further to say that the mind can take you out of this universe. It can take you all around this universe, but it can take you to transcend this universe also if you develop Krishna consciousness. That's the power of the mind. And I wanted to make one more point on the mind when it comes to, what body do we develop at birth and how. In Bhagavad Gita, it's described the process of the mind as thinking, feeling, and willing. You heard this before? Thinking, feeling, and willing. By thinking, this is in relation to contemplating the objects of the senses, which is a fancy way of saying thinking about things we like. So let's use an example. Last night, I played basketball yesterday evening. It's quite tiring. I had dinner. And I was like, I deserve a little ice cream. So I'm like thinking, okay, what ice cream's in the freezer? And I opened the freezer. So I'm thinking, the thought about having something sweet that, okay, you know what? I just burned a bunch of calories in the sun. The ice cream came, or the thought of ice cream came. Okay, so now I'm like feeling the desire to have the ice cream. I'm willing to get off the couch, walk to the freezer, see what ice cream there is, and I'm willing to, if there is ice cream, put it in a cup. And then I'm like, okay, put the ice cream in the cup. And I thought, okay, maybe there's some chocolate in the fridge, and I'll sprinkle some chocolate on top. It was hardened, so I kind of broke it, and so much effort for a little bit of ice cream. But it goes beyond the willing, because if I'm willing to do that enough, what ends up happening is I develop a behavior, right? When reward myself with physical exercise, my behavior is, I think I deserve a little treat. So that becomes a behavior where I think, okay, well, now I can go have a little ice cream. Ice cream's not bad, it's just a simple example. But that behavior becomes a habit, right? So now I'm playing basketball every Thursday and I get sweaty and I want some ice cream to cool me down. I do that often. And that habit, if it goes unchecked, can become my character. I can become that every time I do something positive, I feel like I need to reward myself with food. That could become a problem if I don't check it, right? I can become perhaps addicted to certain kinds of food or the reward of having food every time I do something that I consider healthy, which can negate the healthy activity. So you see how the mind can lead to something so deep rooted? This is just a simple example. I heard another example in this point once about a promotion. If I am thinking I want to get paid more money out of my job, right? And it becomes a thought, becomes a feeling, and I'm willing to take credit for a presentation I didn't really do, but maybe I helped with one slide with on someone else's presentation. And because I take credit for it, I get more visibility. Hey, this guy made the presentation. Hey, he knows what he's talking about. Okay. Now all of a sudden, that feels good to me, so I'm willing to do it again. And then it becomes a habit and it becomes a character, and all of a sudden I'm a cheater. You know, I'm taking credit for somebody else's thing. Because the feeling of being seen is so great. So the mind is very strong, and I want to make this point that this whole process is it starts with the mind, and this is not just something described in the book. This is actually everyone's life experience. We just don't remember it. All of us were born. That's why we're here. And actually, we were born many times. We just maybe know we were born this time and have our birth date in time from this lifetime. But this is everyone's experience. And this experience is summarized very nicely by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He takes these 10, 11 verses, and you'll hear more, I suppose, on Wednesday of this chapter, the prayers of the Jiva. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he takes this experience as his own. He writes a song in Sharanagati called Bulia Tomare, I've forgotten you, O my Lord. Bulia, I've forgotten. And in his old age, he writes this song. And he says, my dear Lord, I will tell you the story of my woe. And I want to go through the song a little bit together. Bhuliya, Bulia, and then Tomare, Tomare. But he says he's addressing Krishna, this is my story of my woe. And I found that very important because one, we could read this and say, ooh, that's a little rough. The baby in the womb goes through something pretty difficult. And then just be, hey, that's not me. I don't identify with that. But he takes it and he goes, oh my God, I went through this. I went through this process and I forgot Krishna. I had a point where I could turn to him and remember him. And I told him, I'm never going to forget you. This is so painful. I can remember my previous births. This is horrible. When I get out of this womb, I'm going to remember you constantly. I promise. And then he says how that promise becomes broken year after year because of different stages of life, naturally. And at the end of his life, he laments. So how should we do it? Yeah, well, I'm going to go through it in English after. We could sing it all together. I just think of I know. I'll make it harder for me. I'll get lost. Try to think of a simple one we can sing together. Bhuliya tomare samsare ashiya Vena navidabhyaita Bhuliya tomare samsare ashiya pena navidha vyaita tomara charane asiachi ami boli bodhu kere kata tomara charane asiachi ami. Actually, for time's sake, I think because of the whole song, we might take the whole class up. I'll read it and we'll go through each verse. But yeah, I'll go through it verse for verse, and we can just keep it up and see this on screen. I'll kind of go word for word a little bit, just for time's sake. But so first, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying this. This is the first stanza. Bhuliya tomare samsari ashya. Bhuliya means forgetting. So forgetting about you, samsara, which this ocean of samsara, this material world. I'm coming again and again because I'm forgetting about you. Nana vidya veta. I'm experiencing different forms of vyaita, suffering. All right, and then he says, now I have come before your feet. Tomare charane asyachi ami. Baliba dukere kata. I'm going to tell you about my dukere, my dukkha, my suffering. Kata, this is my tale. So, forgetting about you so many times, I'm suffering so much. Krishna, let me tell you about what I've realized. And then he says, Janani jatare chilama jakana vishama bandhana pashe. So in the womb of my mother, I was there and I was bound up and it was horrible, essentially. He was saying it was like being bound up with ropes. Eka bhara Prabhu, deka di amore. Just one time, Prabhu, oh Krishna, addressing him as Prabhu, just one time you gave me your darshan. You revealed yourself to me. But then you disappeared. Since then, you've deprived this poor servant. I haven't yet seen you. And then he starts telling, what's the tale? Takana bhavinu janamapaya koriba bhajana tava. Then I thought that at this moment, I've taken birth, I'll engage in your service. I will be engaged in your service. Koriba bhajana tava. But janamahila pari maya chale. What happened is when I was born, I got trapped into Maya. I fell into Maya. I fell into the illusion of thinking I am this body. And since then, not a trace of such consciousness has remained. Nahaila jnana lava. Not a trace. The next verse. Adharere chele svajanera kole hasya katanu kala. Okay, so I have adoring parents. Not a bad thing. It's great you have adoring parents, but due to this, I spent all my time in their laps, smiling, laughing. Janaka janani snehete bulia. Snehe means affection. Unto me, they gave me so much affection, my mother and father. And it felt so good. Samsari lagya bala. It felt so nice. But gradually, krame dina dina balaka hiya. I grew into a young boy. I started playing with other young boys. And later, my intellect developed. And I studied my lessons day in and day out. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a district magistrate. It's a very high up court political position. He was very intelligent. And if you hear about his life and you hear about how he was so efficient in his work, it's unbelievable how much he accomplished in one day. He wrote maybe close to 100 or over 100 books. He had a dozen children. He was intelligent. He could do things well. So he's saying it. This is my life story. Later, my intellect developed. I studied my lessons day in and day out. Vidyara gaurave prami deshe deshe. On the strength of my learning, I travel from place to place. I earned money. I maintained my family with undivided attention. Bhulinu tumare hari. Bhulinu means I forgot you, Hari. Because of this, I didn't do anything wrong, but I got involved in just life. Life happens, right? But he's saying that you can think, basically, you can think, yes, at some point when this slows down, I'll have time for this. You ever had those thoughts? When I finish this or my exams finish, then I'll have more time for this aspect of devotional service. Then I could read more because right now I'm busy with this. I had this thought recently because I help run my father's business, and in running your own business, you're kind of on your own schedule, even though they are deadlines. So I thought recently I went to California for a work conference, and then we had some time off to go to see a few nature parks. And I was thinking, okay, if I finish all my work by this day, I'll have a few days free to enjoy Yosemite National Park. It'll be really nice. And I didn't quite do it. I thought, okay, like give myself some grace. Finish on this day. If I finish on this day, the same task I'm trying to finish then, I'm finishing now. And I'm thinking, okay, if I finish by this weekend, I'll have a little free time. But then something else comes up, and then something else comes up. And I thought, oh my God, I can do this for 30 years and then retire, and then I'll have time. Right? That's another thought. I'm just so busy that, you know what, I don't really have the time to maybe on the weekend, and it becomes this constant cycle of a little bit later, a little bit later. I can't right now, but your excuse seems valid. Oh, but I'm busy. That's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying. Krishna, I told you I'll remember you, but then this happened, and this, and then he's talking about a stage of life that a lot of us are in. I studied day in and day out. I became very intelligent. I traveled. I started to earn money, maintain my family with undivided attention. We need to do these things. Krishna is saying, Arjuna, fight. Don't give up your duty. But remember me as Krishna along the way. If we forget Krishna along the way, these duties won't help us ultimately. But they're not wrong. They're needed. It's just part of living in the material world. But I forgot you, O Lord. And then he says, Vardhakye ekana bhakati vinod. In old age, Vardhakye, now bhakti vinod, Kandiya katara ati. Kandiya, he's crying, he's distressed because nabhajiya tore dina vrite gela. Because I have not passed my days serving you. What will be my fate now? Ekanaki hoibigati. What will be my destination? This is how Bhaktivinoda Thakur prays. I mean, we know Bhaktivinoda Thakur's destination is not taking birth again, but this is the mood of a devotee. He identified with the Bhagavatam. This is so important. These descriptions of the material world, of reality in the material world, is really meant for you to identify with it and surrender. That's the point. That's the point of this. These are bhakti yoga texts because they lead to bhakti, just surrendering to Krishna with utmost love and devotion. That's the point of Bhagavatam in general. And a lot of Bhagavatam has descriptions like these. Sometimes the descriptions are just the universal everything, and they're so detailed, and you think, why? So you can see what's out there. Because how are you going to be, say, how if you're not, if you want to surrender to Krishna and you want to leave behind the apparent pleasures of this world and seek pleasure in Krishna consciousness, you have to be a little bit put off by the material world. You have to think, okay, actually, this is not for me. But how can you do that when you don't know what really goes on, what really is reality in the material world? If you don't know what actually is suffering, and we're not saying all of you go out there and suffer and then come back and then you'll know. Many have, but you can see in Bhagavatam, it tells you this is what happens. This is the cycle of birth and death, very specifically. Notice that. Understand that this isn't something you want. Bhagavatam saying, stay away from this. Instead, surrender unto Krishna. There is real happiness. There is real content. There is actual love. And that's the point of Bhagavatam. That's the point of these verses. And this is why Sharanaktis exists. This is why Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote these songs in a book that literally means surrender. Because he's realizing all these facts about life, and it's bringing him to a point to say, Krishna, I am yours. I am yours, because everything else is not working out for me. And I know where my true relationship, love, and happiness lies. How? Surrender? That's what we're all here for. I love these two verses from Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I'll finish with these and open up for questions. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was speaking to Sanatana Goswami, and he's saying, one is immediately freed from the clutches of Maya if he seriously and sincerely says, my dear Lord Krishna, although I have forgotten you for so many long years in the material world, today I am surrendering unto you. I am your sincere and serious servant. Please engage me in your service. And he quotes Lord Ram. It is my vow that if one only seriously surrenders unto me, saying, my dear Lord, from this day I am yours, and prays to me for courage, I shall immediately award courage to that person, and he will always remain safe from that time on. Srila Prabhupada. Any reflections or questions? Please.
Thank you for class. It is very clear you did your homework because you came in with so many good points.
Thank you.
Yeah, a few things stood out to me. Yeah, to think that like all sperm cells have souls. That's
a very that's a big realization, right? It goes against maybe a lot of what science would say about how life comes.
Yeah, and it adds like a certain level of like seriousness.
Definitely.
And it's also cool how much they know like when all these things develop in the human body, and they know so much about the process of birth, and it kind of is a testament to how scientific the Vedas are. And the animal bodies, hogs, and I just like made the connection in my head. Oh, you become a hog when you pick hog things. So
yeah. If you have a tendency of the animal, I guess hogs do hog. Thank you for those reflections. Yeah, the first point you made about in every drop of semen there is a jiva is actually, I mean, it makes brahmacharya, the seriousness of brahmacharya life, start to realize how actually serious and beneficial that time period is in life, and why Bhagavatam, Gita, our scriptures speak about celibacy, abstinence, self-control, sense control so much. It's it's very important. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, this man, so many synchronicities in this class for me, and I had heard Bhakti Tirtha Swami explain how when you're in a room of Vaishnavas and you're reading scripture and things are always said that directly have to do with you personally or things you're going through. He gave the explanation that it's the Lord in each other's heart. He's arranging that transmission because of like where y'all are at. But like even the ice cream thing, I ate ice cream yesterday. So I never eat ice cream, and I was on a road trip.
Who ate ice cream last night? Everyone's hand slowly goes up.
Yeah, and I had I went through that whole process you explained. It was like at a gas station, and I was like, I don't want to spend money. I love now that nowadays I'm on the road. And when I go into a gas station, I don't feel like I have to buy stuff every time. But they had this ice cream stand in the gas station, and it looked so good. And I'm just like, yeah, I fell for it, And I'm eating while I'm driving, and I was like, oh, my stomach's gonna hurt so bad after this, And I did it anyway, and even more deeply so. with this chapter. Literally yesterday, I had an extended, this is something personal, but I'd like to share just so y'all see how the Lord works. I had an extended conversation yesterday with a friend about how I actually was a teenage parent and that I got a girl pregnant when I was a teenager and she had the kid. I'm talking about extendedly. So my mind was thinking about, okay, now that I understand a little bit more about the cycle of birth and death, the journey of the Jiva soul, you know, how does that pertain into my own personal experiences? So then that leads me into my question. Those are my reflections
Sure,
of like
sure.
I'm like, this is crazy, man, you know? And
Yeah.
so with all these kind of equations of the evolution of the soul and the journey it takes on, and okay, good pious activities, then you have the chance at, you know, being here, and where your mind's at, then you have a chance of going here. But how does the Lord's mercy fit into the equation? Because I feel like we could do everything incorrect, right?
Yeah.
Like even my mother and father, just to keep on the topic, you know, they met at a temple. They were not married and they had me, you know, and now I'm practicing devotional service regularly just at this time in my life, you know. So I just, yeah, so how does the Lord's mercy fit into these equations where
Yeah.
they're imperfect, you know?
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, nice reflections. It's amazing to hear how this stood out for you. You know, Krishna's words, the Lord's words, the Bhagavatam touched your heart in this class. Thank you. How does the Lord's mercy fit into this? Well, a lot of, you know, where we're dragged around the universe comes because of our free will. There's a law of nature that Krishna doesn't tamper with, and that's free will. But at the same time, in verse 1, it says that all never unsupervised. The jiva is always supervised by Krishna. So you can imagine that if, if you're a parent and you have a child, and sometimes you just want to be like, just don't do. Imagine having a child and you have to let them do whatever they want. That can be disastrous, right? And if they do something wrong, there's some reaction they might get, but you can't just be like, well, I'm gonna just stop you entirely. I'm gonna intervene. But if that was the case, and that had to be the case, you would probably want to be by their side the whole time, at least supervising and hoping that they make the right decisions so that they have a better path laid out in front of them. So this is Krishna's position with us. It's this charioteer example was given in Prabhupada's purport. So it's like we're in a chariot going through the material world, and like that, we want that. Krishna's like, okay, so more of that, more of this. But the reality of Krishna's desire is he really, really wants you to remember him and say, oh, actually, I don't want any of this. I want the person who's next to me in the chariot that I don't even notice. That's Krishna's desire. And so when we make one step to Krishna, Krishna takes 10 plus steps back. I've heard 100, I've heard 1,000. The point is he makes more of an effort back to us because his desire for us to come to him is more than our desire for us to go to him. That's the mercy aspect. The Krishna's desire for us to come to him is really strong, but he's so respectful of our free will because love is not forced. Love has to be in our own volition. We have to come from our desire that I want to develop a relationship with you, Krishna. I want to have that relationship because then it's real. Then it's forever. It's solidified. But if that's not coming naturally and Krishna forces it, that's not real love. That's not real bhakti. So Krishna gives us this free will to come on our own volition, to come to him actually from the real self. My Guru Maharaj would tell us often, when you pray, pray from the real you, authentically, because that's ultimately what's going to develop into real love. And when that happens, then the mercy aspect comes. Then, okay, Krishna can interfere with free will, but he sees you have a desire for him, so he's going to pave big path, you know? There's some spiritual desire to find out who God is. Krishna says, oh, wow, he's coming on the right path. Send some devotees, send some devotees, send some devotees. Okay, he didn't take the devotees, but there is that desire, send some more devotees. Okay, he didn't take the devotees, send some prasadam. The opportunities that he would lay out for us because of our desire. Okay, that's where he can intervene. You can't change your desire, but he sees the desire is there, so he's going to facilitate as much as possible. You know, if you were to take the parent example again, and the child is wanting to, you know, you can't change their desire. They want to do something positive. You're going to provide, you know, oh, they have a proclivity to study and they're quite intelligent. You really want to, I'm going to try to put them in a really good school and maybe give them some tutoring, whatever it may be. So this is, think of the relationship of Krishna like that. He'll reciprocate many more fold than our desire when we desire him. Does that make sense? Thank you. Are we on time? Is it? Sorry if there are more questions. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Nama Vaishnava Sarvabhutavatam Rajan Vishwashrojayate. Krishna and the Vaishnava Bhagavad Gita.